Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Israeli Defense Forces retaliate against Hamas as incendiary and explosive balloons continue to float over the southern border. Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Yair Lapid slammed for apparently committing a major faux pas during his recent trip to the United Arab Emirates. And finally, Israel commemorating the incredible rescue mission in Entebbe, Uganda, on this, the 45th anniversary of the operation. We begin with tragic news sending shockwaves through Israel. The sudden and inexplicable deaths of two IDF soldiers within just 48 hours last weekend. First on Thursday, senior IDF officer Colonel Sharon Asman collapsing during routine fitness training. The 42-year-old commander of the Nachal Infantry Brigade falling to the ground while running alongside fellow commanders on base in central Israel. And emergency medical responders pronounced him dead shortly thereafter. He was promoted to brigade commander just 3 days prior to his death. Defense Minister Gantz, President Rivlin, and Prime Minister Bennett all mourning his death as heartbreaking, while lauding Asman's heroism, initiative, and humility. He's survived by his wife and two daughters. Meanwhile, less than a day later, 22-year-old cadet Shiley Westland also pronounced dead. Westland had suffered a yet unknown medical incident and similarly collapsed during training on Tuesday last week. Her mother, Yifat, saying that she has a hole in her heart with Shiley's shape, adding that she's praying to wake up from this nightmare. Investigations into both deaths are now underway. Moving on, IDF clashes with Palestinians rising up again. Israel retaliating against and responding to attacks from Gaza and in Judea and Samaria or the West Bank. IDF aircraft overnight Thursday and then again on Saturday striking Hamas terror infrastructure in Gaza, targets allegedly including a weapons manufacturing site. And this in response to the ongoing Palestinians' use of incendiary and explosive balloons, which have burned thousands of acres over the past few years. Also, the balloons have recently returned to popularity amidst a very shaky ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Hamas, for its part, threatening to restart hostilities, including rocket fire, supposedly over incidents in Jerusalem. And Israel saying that it will respond to incendiary balloons in the same way that it responds to rockets. Now, turning now to more political news. Foreign Minister and alternate Prime Minister Yair Lapid returning from his tour in the United Arab Emirates. But while political officials are largely hailing the visit as a huge success, many are less than impressed. Major Emirati business heads and key Gulf investors claiming they were snubbed in favor of social media influencers, despite repeatedly requesting to meet with Lapid during his trip. Here to discuss, IDF Reserve's Major Dan Pfefferman, Director of Communications at Sharaka and a founding member of the UAE Israel Business Council. Major, thank you so much for being with us. Now, what was the purpose of Lapid's trip?
Yeah, this trip was a part of the new government and the new foreign minister's first foreign trip. And it was important for symbolic but also practical reasons. They wanted to announce, Foreign Minister Lapid wanted to announce that not only will this new administration continue with the strategically important new relationship that was developed just a year ago, but they intend to pick things up and move forward to the next stage of the relationship. Practically, of course, he also officially opened the embassy in Abu Dhabi and the consulate in Dubai, and apparently signed some sort of umbrella agreement for economic, trade, tourism, and strategic cooperation. And these are all signals that it's time to get down to business and move things forward.
So again, many are saying that the trip was very successful and that it was very pleasant. Many things were signed and moved forward. But then why not meet with these business heads and the major investor families, many of whom have spent billions in Israel to date and who were influential in reaching the Abraham Accords?
Sure. I mean, apparently there was a meeting that was supposed to have been set up in Dubai with some of the major investment families who in the UAE context are incredibly influential. They're incredibly close to the government. And from my understanding from sources in the UAE, it was canceled due more to a scheduling miscommunication, maybe a lack of coordination between Lapid's team and the diplomatic teams on the ground. I don't think we should read too much into this or assign more importance to this canceled event than it's due. It's certainly an unfortunate event. What's important to remember here, and I think for all the credit that Netanyahu is due and received for opening up and engineering these relations with the UAE. His critics also pointed out that due to kind of some of the more domestic political jockeying within the Israeli context and the ongoing elections, he'd also prevented other ministers, including his own foreign minister at the time, Ashkenazi, from going out there and from working to build the relationship. So there was a lot of bottlenecks that needed to be opened up on the practical level. I think we should look at the coverage, the positive coverage that was received in the Emirati press as a sign that overall this was a successful trip.
So, and I know you just mentioned that maybe we shouldn't be reading too much into this. So do you think that there will be any consequences, so to speak, of this snub, for lack of a better word? Or do you think that it's really just we're making a mountain out of a molehill?
Yeah, I think that the latter is the case. I think we're making a mountain out of a molehill. We're still learning their culture. They're still learning our culture. And anyone who's spent time in Israeli government circles or in any government really around the world knows that sometimes not everything is coordinated perfectly, and we shouldn't read into this too much. Yair Lapid is a worldly individual. He's a seasoned and polished politician. So, and I think he understands strategically the importance of this. And I think he gets the big picture. And I'm sure he was briefed by the very professional diplomatic team on the ground about Emirati social hierarchies and such. So I don't think we should read into this too much. And it's hard to see that this will deeply affect the relationships beyond perhaps, a temporary annoyance on their part.
All right, so one of the major criticisms of Lapid after this was that he is failing to live up to the promise that Lapid and Bennett made to take it from here, so to speak, after former Prime Minister Netanyahu stepped down after losing the election. Do you think that they're holding up to that promise?
Well, it's only been a couple of weeks, but let's give them a chance to work here. I expect, as Lapid mentioned, I think in his article, and as Israeli ambassador to the UAE, Eitan Naes said, this is the beginning or maybe a continuation. So let's see now, this is the test, if this is going to actually open up more cooperation, more doors will be open, more agreements will be in place. Part of what was supposed to have been accomplished here was that a lot of bureaucratic barriers to continued cooperation were to have been lifted or will have been lifted. And so, this agreement and the Abraham Accords in general, they're meant not only to improve the lives of Israelis and Emiratis, but together to allow Israel and the UAE to better improve the region. And this is what they said in the cooperation agreements. They're going to work together on important issues like energy, water, conservation, desertification, agriculture, science, health, all of these things to help each other, but also to help the region. And then hopefully from here, more countries can get on board. And then indeed, Foreign Minister, alternate Prime Minister Lapid and current Prime Minister Bennett will, I think, certainly can say they've lived up to their promise, but it's just too soon to tell right now.
All right, Major in the Reserves, Dan Pfefferman, thank you so much for joining us again.
Pleasure.
Returning now to more local issues. Palestinian protests against Palestinian Authority President Abbas's regime still ongoing after over a week. Hundreds calling for Abbas to resign in Ramallah following the death of a popular PA critic while in police custody. And the demonstrators may actually be gaining momentum. For the first time since the demonstrations began, rallies on Saturday ended peacefully as opposed to under violent police crackdown. Both the UN and Palestinian human rights groups having condemned the PA for attacking protesters at previous rallies. However, while sparked by the death of critic Nizar Banat, the growing dissent has been building for several months, especially after the long-awaited Palestinian elections were canceled yet again. Even most Palestinians who at one time supported Abbas and his Fatah party now widely viewing the president and his faction as corrupt and autocratic. Of course, that said, there are still those who toe the party line, at least one pro-regime counter-protest popping up in Ramallah as well. Now, in other news, a global heat wave causing a string of massive fires, including both in Israel and nearby. And of course, while dealing with the domestic flames, Israel also doing what it can to send help. Hannah Rifkin with the report.
Israel, Cyprus, Russia, and British Columbia, Canada, now all fighting enormous and spreading wildfires, and extreme temperatures over the last week believed the culprit as the damages grow. In Israel, for one, dozens evacuating from their homes as brush fires rage at and around Gan HaShlosha, or Sachne, a national park in northern Israel. The flames setting 9 cars ablaze and injuring 7. Meanwhile, 50 homes in the Arab-Israeli town of Rameh, within close proximity to the fires, were also evacuated by police, reporting no injuries, the exception being several parkgoers who were treated for smoke inhalation by Magen David Adom paramedics. At least 10 fire departments in the area working to contain the blazes and reporting success, but with no confirmation as to the cause of the spark just yet. Then, far from alone, a wildfire in neighboring country Cyprus similarly spreading, with requests for Israel's emergency help coming from both the small island nation and the European Union. The fire spreading through a mountainous area of the island, causing at least, if not more than 7 villages to clear out, with several homes and private land seen engulfed in flames. And Cyprus Environmental Minister Kostas Kadis telling the CYBC State News that the wildfire has already destroyed, quote, huge tracts of forest. So Israel already answering the call, sending 2 firefighting planes along with fire-retardant materials to aid in the crisis. An Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett restating the, quote, close ties between the two nations and, quote, in particular on mutual assistance in times of crises.
Moving on, Israel has long been known as the startup nation, aka Silicon Wadi, and the recent Israeli IPOs on Wall Street only confirm this title. Yet the nation is still facing a serious challenge to its intellectual capital, a brain drain phenomenon whereby Israel's best and brightest take their skills elsewhere as soon as the offer arises. So what can and is being done to prevent this trend from growing? Joining me to discuss is news and features correspondent with the Media Line, Maya Margit. Thank you so much for being with us, Maya. Now, what are the numbers? How many intellectuals and highly skilled Israelis are leaving the country?
Well, it's very hard to put exact figure on how many people are leaving on a yearly basis. But basically, there was a report in late 2019 by the Shoresh Institution for Socioeconomic Research. And one thing that they said that was very interesting is that for every Israeli citizen with a university degree who returns from abroad, there's a corresponding 4.5 Israelis with degrees who leave the country the same year. So that means that there are more and more educated Israelis, highly educated Israelis that are leaving the country than those that are returning from abroad, from living abroad, essentially.
And could we maybe extrapolate and see how this might affect Israel and Israel's economic environment if this trend continues as is?
It's becoming a growing kind of war zone, the tech sector in many countries around the world. Basically, governments have realized for many years now that for every dollar you invest into the tech sector, you get significant returns, like 5 or 6-fold returns. So a lot of these different countries are trying to woo, engineers, computer programmers, different types of people. And if Israel isn't able to keep up in terms of providing better infrastructure, in terms of providing better educational programs, then some people are worried. Some experts in the tech sector are worried that we might find ourselves with a dwindling kind of startup scene and fewer innovative products.
All right, so really the first of 2 main questions is, why is this happening? What are the contributing factors to shape this brain drain that is pushing Israeli intellectual out?
So there are many different contributing factors. There's been a chronic shortage of labor and human capital in the tech sector here in Israel for a very long time now. There are different things that have contributed to it. Among them are underdeveloped infrastructure. For instance, most of the tech professionals that we know of today in Israel live in the center of the country around Tel Aviv, the Merkaz as it's called in Hebrew. And part of that reason is that most of the companies are based there, but also that it's very difficult to access some of the peripheral areas of Israel, parts of the Negev, areas that are not as well served by public transit, for instance. Another factor that's really big and that many tech sector experts complain about is regulation. Things are overly regulated. It's hard to jump through the bureaucratic hoops that the government has put in place. And basically what this means is that the Israeli government has to catch up and change the way it tries to woo these professionals and to keep the businesses staying here with different kinds of benefits, for instance.
So that brings me really then to my second of the 2 big questions. What is being done and what can be done that isn't being done to reverse these, to address these issues, really?
Well, the new government, the new Israeli government has said that they want to increase the workforce. The Israeli labor workforce that's currently working in tech is about 10%. That means that about 10% of all Israeli workers are employed in the tech sector at the moment, and they want to bring that up to 15%. That means that that's hundreds of thousands of people, basically. It's very hard to quickly train people necessary with the necessary skills and bring them into the tech sector. So what the government is trying to do right now is focus on different communities like the ultra-Orthodox sector in Israel, which has been, lagging behind in this area. Peripheral communities, as I mentioned, that are not living in the center of the country, that are not in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or the major cities. And they're also trying to, the government hinted that they will be looking into educational programs for youngsters, for kids in primary schools, maybe starting the training and the educational aspect of things very young, so that kids will be more interested in joining these STEM fields, in going into engineering and computer science and other tech-related fields when they're older.
All right, well, let's hope that everything works out for the better. Maya Margit, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you.
Now, it is the 4th of July, and Americans around the world are celebrating the United States' independence. But Israelis are celebrating the anniversary of another liberation, the 45th anniversary of Operation Thunderbolt, one of the most daring and successful rescue missions ever attempted. 45 years later, and Operation Thunderbolt, aka Operation Entebbe, is still being commemorated, and for very good reason. The operation, praised by the international community for doing the impossible, remains among the most incredible, daring, and creative solutions to a high-stakes situation in world history. And Israel now releasing renewed details about the planning, execution, and aftermath of the operation, complete with an interview featuring Tamir Pardo, former director of the Israeli Mossad and veteran of the Entebbe operation, as the officer under leading operational commander and brother to former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Lieutenant Colonel Yoni Netanyahu.
תן לצה"ל משימה, הוא יודע לבצע אותה. בכל מקום על הגלובוס, בצורה מוצלחת.
It all started June 27, 1976, when 4 Palestinians from the PFLP terror group hijacked an Air France passenger jet en route to Paris. The terrorists then diverted the plane to Entebbe, Uganda, with the support of then Ugandan President Idi Amin, all while demanding a $5 million ransom and the release of hundreds of prisoners worldwide. Upon landing in Uganda, though, the hijackers released all of the non-Jewish and non-Israeli hostages off to Paris, and they threatened to begin killing the remaining hostages within 48 hours unless all demands were met. Well, thankfully, it was actually in interviewing these released hostages that Israeli commandos were able to get a better picture of what they were up against, and with that, the rescue mission was hatched. 100 elite commandos would fly hours through enemy territory to Uganda to then impersonate President Amin's motorcade, eliminate the terrorists, liberate over 100 hostages, and cripple Uganda's ability to give chase, all in just about 90 minutes. It was a plan that would go awry within minutes of touchdown, killing lead officer Yoni Netanyahu and crippling Commando Soren Hershko, but which would nevertheless largely result in success. Meanwhile, as Israelis were beginning the operation, President Amin was himself in the Republic of Mauritius, addressing the Organization of African Unity as its outgoing chairman. In the address, Amin expressing support for the hijacking and praising himself for Uganda's supposedly humanitarian response, adding that he cut off communications with Israel for the sake of the hostages.
It was not my intention to tell the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine to bring the hostages to Uganda, but I accept to land there for the humanitarian ground. And also, there was... and it is the first time for the history of the hijackers in the world. The hostages removed from the airplane and put in comfortable place, which never happened anywhere.
It was only on his way home that Amin learned of the successful Israeli evacuation.
אני יכול רק לומר, מתוך היכרות שלי, בסך הכל השתחררתי מתוך מערכת הביטחון לפני 5 שנים. אז בכל מערכת הביטחון עשו פעילויות מדהימות, והדורות הצעירים עולים דרגות רבות על הדור שלנו.
Now, on to the topic of amazing Israeli cultural phenomenon. The 2 exciting events coming our way. Who better to tell us all about them than TV host and content creator Liran Notik? Liran, I'm very excited to have you back as always.
Thank you so much. How was your weekend?
It was really great. It was very busy. How was yours?
I mean, I just took myself to the beach, Herzliya Beach, for a change. Tried to get some tan. I'm so white, I cannot. No, you tell me.
We got a little bit of color.
I mean, okay.
Right. So what do we got?
We have today a festival theme. I tried to bring something different today. So first of all, we have a new movie called Entebbe, which is about the illustrator lady from Finland, Toby Jansen. Now, people don't know her, so first of all, let's have a small glimpse from the trailer of the movie.
So it looks gorgeous, the cinematography and everything.
Yeah, so TLV Fest is all about films that they bring to Israel. It's LGBTQ films that they try to bring to Israel culture. I mean, usually those kind of films does not make to the big screens, to the big cinemas, right? So they have enormous initiations, and it's all about supporting that festival, first of all. So TLV Fest, you can buy tickets to see that movie. The movie is about Toby Jansen. She illustrated the famous series show called Moomins. Not Minions, Moomins. It's a 1945 series show that actually my husband was growing up on that show till the 90s and the 80s and the 2000s. It's still broadcasted in Chinuchit in Israel. So go ahead.
So one of those figures that everybody knows but doesn't know they know.
Nobody knows what happened behind the scenes, how the small characters were created, first of all. So have a look in that.
All right, and I understand that they'll be screening it at 9 p.m. on Wednesdays, July 14th.
Yeah, and also the 21st.
All right.
Buy tickets on TLV Fest. It's going to be amazing. Go watch.
All right,
the second
next.
one is we're going to Be'er Sheva. We have Tu B'Av almost. Did you prepare something for your wife?
Well, I'm on TV, so I don't want to say. But yeah, for those who don't know, Tu B'Av is the Israeli Jewish version of Valentine's Day.
It's amazing, love holiday, and Be'er Sheva is trying to make the best out of it. So we have on Be'er Sheva Natan Goshen and Nasrin Kadri, and David Broza is coming there also. There's a huge, amazing new lake in Be'er Sheva called the River Park Lake. Yeah, you can see some pictures of that. And it's a new place to, hang out. And what's a better way to celebrate a new lake in Israel, if not on Tu B'Av with those amazing artists? You can buy tickets online.
Awesome concerts at the lake.
Yeah, it's going to be so festive and amazing and romantic. I hope my parents will go there.
Why not? I mean, you have Natan Goshen and David Broza, both of whom have an incredible lineup of music.
And you know what? Every time I try to bring something new, usually it comes from Tel Aviv because Tel Aviv is the capital of culture. But now, folks, just go outside Tel Aviv, go to Be'er Sheva, have fun, celebrate with your beloved ones.
With a little awesome new lake in the middle of the desert. It's perfect. All right, well, Liran, I'm very excited as always to hear about these events. And anybody who can make them, please try and do so. Tickets, by the way, for the Be'er Sheva Lake events are at mishkan7.co.il. So see if you can check it out. Liran, thank you so much for being with us.
See you next time. Thank you so much.
And now before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel.
Läuft am polnischen Strand entlang.
No big deal, just a family of boars looking for a cool spot to hang, you got a lot of kids, it's a big family, and you know how it is, you go to the beach, you're looking for a nice clear spot, not too close to other beach goers, not too far away from the water. That looks like a good spot. Maybe not. Okay, I guess not. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.27 shekels to the American dollar and 2.66 shekels to the Canadian dollar. And finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.